Welcome to the Kerrville Bible Church podcast, where we seek to encourage and equip you for the work of ministry by taking a pastoral look at a variety of biblical and theological topics. Stay tuned until the end of the episode to learn how you can submit a question for us to answer on the podcast. Welcome back to the Kerrville Bible Church Pastors Podcast. My name is Toby Baxley. I am your host, and I'm joined in studio today by Scott Christensen, and we have some special guests with us today. Murray is out on a mission scouting trip, and Chris remains out on his sabbatical, but we have some special guests today. We have Tooter and Starr Bowlin, longtime members here at Kerrville Bible Church. I think we were talking earlier, it's been 10 years, right?
Yes, sir.
And but faithful members, and they've got just a wonderful testimony and a story of God's faithfulness, and we wanted to have them on to talk about their story and how that would encourage you as they just recount the Lord's faithfulness in their life and in their marriage. So, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for being here. We're so glad. I've wanted to do this for a long time and just never got around to broaching the subject. And Scott, I know, approached you a couple weeks ago at church and asked if you'd be willing to
I strong-armed him.
You strong-armed him.
That's his story, too.
So, as we get started, just, talk about kind of where you grew up, and y'all are both from here, right? But
No.
I am.
No, you're not. Okay. Well, Tooter, why don't you get us started with that?
Well, in about 6 weeks, I will be 80 years old, and I have spent 80 years in Kerrville, Texas.
Wow.
I was born on the southeast side of town, right above the VA hospital, in a house there, and there was 6 in our family. 3 boys, 1 girl, and my mom and dad. And it was a place for the poor people in town to live.
Okay.
So we didn't have running water or any indoor things, so everything was outside.
Okay.
So this is right at the beginning of World War II then?
I was a war baby in 43, yes.
Yeah.
And my dad came from a family of 17, 2 mothers, and they had him to pick cotton. He was from Arkansas. And in that Arkansas brood, my dad was the only one that ran away from home. I had an uncle that survived World War I. He was gassed. He came here because this was a place to be cured of
tuberculosis and different lung disorders.
Lung diseases.
Mm-hmm.
And so my dad ran away from home and came down here. He can neither read nor write because, like I said, he was made to pick cotton.
Mm-hmm.
And I wish in my lifetime that I would have tried to help him more in that area, but he was a stubborn man and a prideful man. So
he got a job at the VA.
Yes, he washed dishes there for 35 years.
Wow.
And raised a family.
At the VA hospital here? Yeah. So that VA hospital's been here for a long time.
Since the late 20s.
It was first a sanatorium
yeah.
for tuberculosis and people with lung disorders. This area was known as one of the healthiest climates in our country, so they
Was
were
that
sending
before all the cedar?
Yeah.
No, partly. Old man Schreiner, Mr. Schreiner, he said when he came here back in the 1850s, there was very little cedar. Mesquite, but no cedar. And in that time, it's invaded.
Yeah.
So.
Did you grow up going to church?
There's another situation. My mother was staunch Baptist who believed that every one of her children should be on church on Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday. If that door opened, we were there. I got gold stars for being yearly. And in so doing, we first met in my mother's home, in her home there, as meager it was. And then after that, Granny Butt, as we call her, Miss Butt, who started HEBs, she came from a poor family. She came here because her husband had tuberculosis. And my mom and her got to know each other quite well. And over the years, they formed a little old church. And because of Miss Butt, there wasn't a young man or a young lady in Oak Park that didn't have a Christmas. She would put the tree up in the church, and she would put boxes of fruit, apples, pears, ribbon candy, and give it all to them, us. And so we always had a happy Christmas. And let me say, and also that sounds like a bad thing, being raised up there, but what a blessing it was in life. All throughout my life, I have the capability of looking at someone and know that they're hurting or not hurting. And because of that, it was the upbringing I had in church and loving one another.
It was a close-knit community there. I mean, it really was like church. Everybody, most of the people did go to church there, so they became friends and had birthday parties for each other. And he has many pictures of those groups of kids and parents all
and everybody
celebrating.
knew they had a meal at my mother's house.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
excellent cook.
if they were doing poorly that month for wages, come see my mom.
So is that part of town, is that like where the animal shelter is now, that kind of area?
All that area there, yes.
Okay.
Where the UPS and the fire station?
That road
Legion
going back
Drive.
toward the swimming
Legion
pool.
Drive.
Yeah.
But it actually...
It was a town at the time.
Oak Park was its own town. Had
Is
its
that right?
own
Okay.
zip code and everything on the map.
And that's where I was raised, and more than happy to be proud of saying that's where I was raised.
Yeah.
And that's where God stayed with me throughout my life. Everything that happened there had reference to God taking care of me.
Right. So you were raised and heard the gospel in that church and were
Heard the
baptized
gospel.
there.
I'm probably the only person here that has seen 3 different revivals that last over 2 weeks at a time. I remember, black segregation at the time. I never went to school with any blacks. But there was a group that we invited up to the church. They were black. And they come in singing, and you know how they're happy. And I got shoes, you got shoes, all of God's children got shoes. But when we get to heaven, gonna walk all over God's heaven, heaven. So that started my desire to sing and my desire to Starr and I, after marriage, we sung at a lot of churches.
Yeah. Yeah. I sang that song in college.
Did you?
So, well, Starr, when did you get to town? And where'd you come from?
You just showed up one day out of nowhere.
I did. Well, my parents evidently met in San Antonio when both of them were in the service. He was in the Army Air Corps. It was the Army at the time, and she was a Navy Wave. So they met there. He was from Oklahoma. She was from Tough, Texas, outside of Medina. That's where she was born. So being in the military, we were
so
all...
when you said Tough, Texas, like that's a town?
Yes, it was a town.
I thought it was like the condition of Texas.
Well, it was both. They tried to... It was TUFF. When they came together in the early 1900s trying to form that town, they shot out all kinds of names, and all of them were taken. And one of our relatives said, it's kind of tough to get a name for this place. And so they said, well, let's call it that. So
it stuck.
TUFF. It only lasted about past the Depression, right?
About
And then
1939.
and then they reconsolidated back into Medina. So, so my parents married, and all of us were born on bases in the United States. My brothers were born in Kansas on that Army base. I was born in Denver on that Army base near there, Aurora, I think. And my sister was born in Sacramento on their base. So after he got out of the service, he got a job at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Tucson, and so that's where we settled for a while. That's the longest place we'd ever lived, 10 years, I think. And then, but because my mother's parents were from this area, every summer we came back here to spend the whole summer. She'd drop us off after school's out, and we'd visit grandparents and aunts and uncles and cousins, and we really enjoyed. That was our favorite part of the year, is to do that. But I came here in '65 and lived here permanently. My dad had committed suicide a year and a half before, and so we were struggling as a family. And so when I went through that summer, a cousin who lived here said, "Come live with us. Just ask your mom and see if it's all right." And she said yes. And so that's when I came. But then the next February, I met Tooter in '66. And then by summer, we were married. I graduated 2 weeks out of high school, and we were married. So.
Married her when she was 17.
Had to get my mother's permission.
It is correct,
slip.
isn't it? Train up a child and let it go when they're old and not going to depart from it.
I always say I wasn't as young as Mary when she got married,
right.
when she married Joseph.
Yeah.
But it was quite
No
young.
one gave us any hope.
Yeah.
Yes.
They said you'd never make it, huh?
They
Never
did.
make it.
They all warned us. And I'm
had
sure
a-
it was wisdom. But
Yeah. I had an aunt and uncle that eloped young, and they said, I'll never make it. And they made it until she passed away. But anyway,
Yeah.
so
It'll
y'all
be
were married when you went into the Marine Corps, right? You were,
No.
No, I had already been hurt 4 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, tell us about that. A lot of our church members will recognize you, but some of our other listeners might not. That you're in a wheelchair and paralyzed.
That's correct,
And,
from the waist down.
From the waist down, and you've been.
I went into the Marine Corps. I had two brothers that were in the Marine Corps above me. My brother Jackie got killed in the Marine Corps at 19. My brother Jerry committed suicide and killed his wife. I went into the Marine Corps pretty despondent about all that stuff. And I was a military policeman. And I guess I arrested somebody I shouldn't have, because I was on my way in town and I was on this bridge and I heard a car coming and my friend was with me and I started running and I didn't make it to the other side. They hit me, knocked me over the bridge. I fell 35 foot, hit some ocean breaker rocks, and at that time it just paralyzed me from right here down.
From your neck.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it was near the ocean. The ocean breaker rocks stopped the
Near
tide
San
from
Diego.
erosion.
Camp
And,
Pendleton area.
I asked my friend to help, and he took off, and that was the last I ever saw of him. So I kept hollering, and finally I passed out. And then the tide coming in, and in that doing, now this sounds terrible, but it wasn't. All it did was draw me closer to God. The crabs were there, and the tide, and all I could move was my head. And I thought, well, if I don't drown, those doggone crabs going to get me for lunch. You know? So I came to, and I said, I'm going to give it one more try. And so I hollered, and that was about 7:30 at night, and I'd been there since probably over 8 hours. The guy never came back. I started hollering. 2 Marine captains in a Volkswagen heard me, came down, covered me over with a military blanket, and called an ambulance. Now, this is where Christians need to believe what I'm fixing to say. I knew at that moment God had sent somebody to take care of me. And in that time, I went from there to San Diego Naval Hospital. They did surgery. They called my parents and said, come out, your son's not going to live. But I knew better. I mean, I was coming in and out, and I felt God's closeness. And to make it strong in the fact that it was, we had a board of inquiry a while later, and I read the board of inquiry. We were locked down because of the Cuban crisis. There was no Volkswagen. There was no Marine captains. Yet
Registered to that base.
They were there. They saved my life.
So there was no Volkswagen on
No
on
Volkswagen
base.
or 2
Right.
Marine captains. Now that'll make your hair stand up. And my mom came out, and not my dad, but my sister, my brother-in-law, and the doctors told them the diagnosis and all this. And I looked at my mom. I came to long enough. I said, Mom, don't worry. I said, because God's taking care of me. All right, at that time, my mom started a prayer group at Oak Park, and they prayed every night for 3 nights, day and night. And by the 3rd day, they said that I was going to make it. So isn't that something? Now, the lifespan of a paraplegic at that time was 12 to 17 years, 12 good years, the rest of them going downhill.
Yeah.
Kidneys, things like that. I have now been in this wheelchair 60 years. And there's been quite a few things happen to me. But don't feel sorry for me in any way. I've never had, and this is the gospel according to Jesus Christ, I have never had a bad moment in my life. And only because God gave me such an insight into life that at that moment I knew that I had to show in front of my Lord that I was one that could take anything that anybody threw at me. And so far, it's happened.
So those were your thoughts there, laying on that.
I was laying there,
those
yeah.
rocks.
I thought, well, I had did everything I wanted to do, mostly because I was not a wild child. But at 3 o'clock on Friday, I was out that window in school, and I was on the river or someplace like that. And so I knew every place. I still know every place in Kerrville, because I either roamed it and stayed gone all weekend, or I was just out having a good time. And to make one good funny point, there was a pear orchard right out of Oak Park going down toward the swimming pool of the school there. And I saw Tom Sawyer.
He read the book.
And so I thought, well, now this is the way to go. I went down and picked me about 2 dozen pears. And the big tree that I laid in, it had a big old limb coming out like this, and it had a place for your head and all that. So I stuck all them pears in my shirt and everything. I got up on that tree and I laid back. I'd take a bite, throw one here, throw one there. I had the biggest stomach ache and thought I was going to have to go to the hospital, but I sure Tom Sawyer'd it.
Yeah.
That was another good time.
Carefree.
Carefree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So your time in California in the hospital there, I remember you telling me something about some kind of rack that you were attached to, where they would turn you over periodically.
Yes.
Striker frame.
It's called a striker frame. and you lay your head in a face mask. They clamp you down on each side where they can turn you every 2 hours to keep you from having pressure sores, things like that. And thank God I've never had one. And over the time period, I went from 185 down to about 99, 100 pounds, and had to eat everything out of straw. And they wouldn't discharge me from the military, red tape, I don't know why, to go to Long Beach VA hospital. And there's another answered prayer. My mother knew Jim Nugent, who was a railroad commissioner here. His dad worked out at the VA with my dad. And so we got in touch with Jim Nugent. And after I spent 6 months on the striker frame, they let me up and I immediately passed out. But I was on my way to Long Beach.
Okay.
Started recuperating. Took over a period of time, 18 months. My stomach had dropped, my kidneys had dropped. Whenever I was laying there with the water around and everything, the pressure in my leg, my blue jeans were so bad, it split the blue jeans and blood was coming out. Nose, ear, everything. I thought I was in really bad shape, which probably was.
You were.
But
Yeah, I don't think there's any illusions about that reality.
No, but again, you know, this was just a build-up to what God had in my life. And I believe that to this day, so I don't have any regrets being in this wheelchair.
Yeah.
If I had not been in this wheelchair, I would have turned out differently. Because like I said, I was kind of moving on the outside, down the river. But God, on May the 17th of 1955, I heard God calling. And I went down the aisle. Afterwards, I was putting my clothes on in the back room, and I had enough sense to ask God. I said, God, I know you don't barter. I said, but I need a couple of things. I said, I need a fine wife. And with that fine wife, I want a son and a daughter, and I want it to be happy. And so, 57 years later, God honored that to the T. And all of my family is saved. And it's because of that one wish that I asked for God. Didn't ask for anything more other than He used me. And there was one spell after I got hurt that I wasn't following God. I don't know if it was PTSD because they didn't know what that was. But for about 2 years there, I went the wrong way. But one Saturday morning, my wife and I looked at each other. I said, we're going back to church. So we went back, and here we are. Now I'm talking too much.
No, you're not. That's why you're here. They don't want to hear me talk. They want to hear you. So your rehab there in Long Beach, is this where you regained some of your upper body?
I got all of my upper body strength, and where my legs are here like this, I can do this just a twitch.
Okay.
That's all.
Did they expect you to get your upper body strength in your
No,
arms?
it cut my spinal cord.
Yeah, they expected his upper strength, his upper body.
Oh, yeah, the
yes.
upper.
Yes,
But
not
nothing from my waist down.
because his spinal injury was not completely severed. There was one little fine piece, they said.
And that was it.
And so strips of muscles or feelings would come back, but only to the knees. And then everything from the knees down is dead. Yeah.
And now
But,
just the feeling is there.
But he had good mentors there. Doctors. That was the renowned spinal cord injury hospital of the world in that area, in
Dr.
that
Carr.
era.
They're pretty straightforward. Dr. Carr told me, he said, son, best thing we can do for you is strap you in a wheelchair and you go home. I said, sounds good to me.
He said, you don't want to stay
But
here.
I didn't get strapped down.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't want to stay here where
He
these
said, "You
people
see
are
some
not
of these
living."
people, they've been here 3, 4, 5 years, and they'll be here
He
another
said,
3, 4, 5 years.
You might succumb to hopelessness if you stayed, right?
That's exactly
Yeah.
right, yeah. They turned to dope or they turned to alcohol.
Yeah,
I didn't want any part of that.
right. So what kept you going during those times?
Friends,
Yeah.
church. I knew my pastor just like I know y'all. I mean, I was very close. In fact, he married us. And I knew the friends I had were good friends. They were there. They took me out all the time we went out. And we just enjoyed life.
Yeah, he enjoyed life. He enjoyed rolling down the Ingram Dam in his wheelchair.
I heard about that.
They dared him to do it. So they scattered for the chair and left Tooter to flounder.
I was bobbing like a cork.
Did your chair float?
It didn't. It went down.
It did? Okay.
It was
I was on number 2 myself.
it was an Everest and Jennings chrome thing,
Oh,
and it
goodness.
just sunk like a
60 pounds
Yes.
or so.
Oh.
But
That
You only did that once, though, right? Or did you
Once.
go back
That
up
was
and
enough.
do it again? Okay.
I turned sideways and every which way. Wasn't good.
Yeah.
But when you say what keeps me going, early in life, every Christian, and it's not taught enough or brought forward enough about having a helper. I realized it whenever I was 12. I realized it when I'm 80 years
capital
old.
H.
You got to have a helper. And God saved me one. Now, I don't know how many I've wore out, but they're probably up there and they say, "Next, Tooter." They all go, "No, not him. Please, not him."
So you're talking about guardian angels then.
Anyway.
Helpers on the outside and
the
helper
helper's
on
always
the
been next
inside.
to me as far as I'm concerned. I don't have any bad times.
Yeah.
I have a good outlook on life. My kids have an excellent outlook because whenever they would get in a mood, I'd say, "I'll give you a reason to get in a mood." And that took care of that. So they're not real sensitive to people that whine.
Okay.
And this is going to the church, is it? Oh, me.
A little bit to the church and a little bit beyond.
Yeah, all right. Be sure and edit it.
We don't edit anything.
We say it like it is.
Yeah. Oh. Well, Starr, you mentioned it earlier, and that your dad committed suicide, but you didn't have. Other than that, you didn't have a real stable, happy home life up to that point, did you? Or
No, I did not.
Yeah.
Stable was he went to work and provided for us. He was a good provider. And Mom was a good provider too. They both worked. So we had clothing and food. We had all the amenities that Tooter didn't have as a child. But what we didn't have was a lot of love, a lot of affirming, encouragement from parents, or even good training. They were both drinkers and partiers, so of course what goes along with that is some bad stuff.
Heartache.
And
Yeah.
a lot of heartache. So there was some abuse, verbal, physical, things like that. But honestly, when he committed suicide, to be honest, there was not a lot of love lost between at least me and him. And then I felt
How many siblings did you have?
4 siblings. 4 siblings. All of us were 4. 2 brothers that were twins that were older. I was the middle, and then a younger sibling. So we kind of just coped with a situation like that. Of course, back then in the 40s and 50s, you didn't tell neighbors or friends what was going on in your house. But so we endured about 14 years of our dad. Mom was the rock. She would comfort at the time. But the moment, the night he committed suicide, or the day he did, we were in school and came home and found him. And I remember the next weekend, my mom said, okay, so I was 14, my brothers were 16, and my sister was 13. She said, I've had my time raising you. You're old enough to be on your own. So she left, and there we were. We had moved to another house in Tucson, and if we didn't want to go to school, we didn't go to school. There was many times we signed each other's excuses and all that, but I guess a CPS agent got a hold of her somehow. I didn't know how, because we didn't know where to find her either.
Right.
She came in one weekend.
So you were literally, she left you.
Yes.
And they were there by themselves.
We were living by ourselves.
You were living by yourselves in the house. I mean, wow.
Yeah.
How old are you at this point?
I was 14.
Okay.
My brothers were 15, almost 16. And my sister was 13. So we just we knew how to fix a meal, so we would cook for each other and that kind of thing. But going to school, if we didn't want to go to school, we didn't go to school. So she came in and brought her boyfriend, and unfortunately, I was not saved at the time, had no church background. So the first thing that came out of my mouth is, "Oh, you decided to come back and be the mother, have you?" I thought you were a good roommate, but so that was disrespectful. I know that now, but that's just the way it was.
Yeah.
And in a couple of weeks, she left again, and so that's what it was.
Become a habit.
So she kind of came and gone whenever she felt like it.
Yes.
Come home with a different man that was uncle or whatever.
Yep. So we, that summer is the summer we came to Tucson. I mean, from Tucson made our trek in the summer to here. But none of my siblings wanted to go. My brothers, I guess we'd spent a whole nother year there in Tucson, and they joined the Navy, so they were out of the house. And then, so I was 15 at the moment, 15 or 16. 16. And then, so that summer is when I came back. I was by myself. And that's when my cousin asked if I would live with her. And then went to school and met Tooter, and marriage sounded really good to me.
Well,
I don't have to go back.
Before we get into that, I think this is a good spot to end this particular episode, and then pick up next week with the rest of this conversation, and get into how y'all met, and just kind of from that point forward. And this has been a good, just encouraging talk, and so we want to pick it up on our next episode. Thanks for listening to the Kerrville Bible Church podcast. In future episodes, we would like to answer your biblical, theological, or pastoral questions. Send them to us via email at questions@kerrvillebiblechurch.org, or leave us a text or voicemail at 830-321-0349.